When I first saw Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, I was blown away. Blown away because of all the things Netflix could make. They canceled Shadow and Bone, Lockwood and Co., truly incredible shows, and greenlit this. They greenlit this. Not only did they greenlight this, but they greenlighted two of them, and both of them sucked. Both of them were really bad. If you're unaware, Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon is a two-part sci-fi space opera classic developed in the same stylings of Dune and Star Wars. And yeah, a classic this is not going to be. It's bad. People do not like this movie. I know that Zack Snyder is a controversial director, but I mean, this movie isn't controversial. I think that the opinion on it is pretty decided. It's rough. And you might be wondering, Crispy, you're a Dungeons & Dragons channel. Why are you talking about this movie? Well, the reason why is because I was specifically impressed by how this movie emulated so many of the bad habits that dungeon masters and players have in their D&D campaign, or maybe better described as their Warhammer campaign, since this lifts so much from Warhammer. I mean, I'm not even a Warhammer fan, and I can tell. I mean, God. But, I mean, no matter what you're playing, Warhammer, Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, whatever, I mean, a lot of tabletop role-playing games share these exact same mistakes, which blows me away. So without further ado, guys, we're going to talk about Rebel Moon, a movie that is really bad, and seeing what we can learn from it to make ourselves better dungeon masters, because again, the parallels between this and bad D&D campaigns are truly staggering. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, first up, the lore. Now, this might seem hypocritical. I have talked about in the past myself writing a massive 50-plus page document detailing the lore of my own homebrew world of Eris for my Dungeons & Dragons campaign. And yeah, that's a lot. But frankly, I don't think that lore itself is the mistake. The real mistake is the fact that Zack Snyder and Rebel Moon prioritized the lore over the story. This is something that a lot of DMs, especially DMs that are really big into world building, make during their campaigns. When you are developing out your world, I mean, it's cool. You are having a good time making up your pantheon of gods, the politics of the local nations, all the dynasties and histories, and that's fun. We love doing that as dungeon masters, a lot of us at least. But that cannot take priority over the story of the player characters at your table. First and foremost, the most important thing at your game is the characters themselves. That's not to say that your world, your lore, that isn't important. It is. But remember, the focus of the story is the characters. We get invested in stories because of characters. I love Lord of the Rings' world building, but I love Lord of the Rings in the first place because of people like Aragorn, who's just cool, or Sam, who's just amazing. You know, these characters got me invested into the world from the get-go. Then I learned about the lore and the history, etc., etc., etc. At least as much as I could take in. Tolkien made a big world. Zack Snyder also made a big world, but the difference is that the world took precedence over the story itself. I mean, it's important to remember, Zack Snyder with Rebel Moon, he's ripping off Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai is actually a pretty low-key story if you've seen the original Kurosawa film. I mean, if you've seen the two westerns, Magnificent Seven, both of which I think are actually pretty awesome. Again, small-scale story. And yeah, Zack Snyder is integrating it into this massive world and focusing on the huge-scale space opera stuff rather than the smaller-scale story that he's directly ripping off. It just doesn't work together. Seven Samurai is about 7 different people getting together, each with their own skill sets, to help train a village to defend itself against an encroaching power. It's not a story about massive galactic conquests. However, Snyder tries to shoehorn in this big world building into it, and it just doesn't work. From a Dungeons & Dragons perspective, it's like when you're starting out your first D&D game and already you're bringing in politics of gods beyond the player's comprehension when they're just fighting goblins. Like, start with the small stuff. There's nothing wrong with a low-key story. Again, these massive stories are cool. I love massive stories like this in D&D. I run 70-session plus campaigns that last over 2 years. But those campaigns start here. Start here and grow into this. You can't rush it like Snyder did. We're going to talk about that in the future. But it's important to remember that a lot of the mistakes I'm going to talk about in this video originate right here in this point. Snyder putting the lore before the story, the lore before the characters, the lore before everything, and resulting in a story that just feels hollow. Lore doesn't matter if no one gives a shit. Okay, next up. Let's talk about those characters. You know the edgy rogue? You know, the one that's quiet, stoic, mysterious, and tragic past. Enemies beyond count. No one talking to them. Yeah, that's like every character in Rebel Moon. Like, seriously, every character in Rebel Moon is a stoic, legendary warrior. And again, this is such a common D&D character trope, a bad one, by the way, that I could not believe it's included in this movie, not once, not twice, but for every character, dude. Blew me away. Now, let's go over why this mistake is a mistake. First and foremost, stoic characters are cool. Kratos is an amazing character. I love Kratos, and he is very stoic, very laconic. Kratos still talks to people, though. He still interacts with other characters. If anything, his stoic, laconic speech makes his interactions even more charming. A stoic character doesn't necessarily mean a character who never talks at all. Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon has characters, they say words, but they say few words. They say few words to each other. It's one of the things that bothered me the most about part 1 of this film. Also, another big thing, if all the characters are the same, it's kind of hard to build a party dynamic. A major attractive thing about Dungeons & Dragons, and hell, a major attractive thing about Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai, is bringing together a bunch of different characters to form a party. If you've seen the remake of Magnificent Seven, I actually think the remake is pretty good at this specific part. I mean, all these characters that come together in the remake are very different in their aesthetics, their ethnic backgrounds, their skill sets, and that means that as a team, it's interesting. You have the love-struck, handsome man gambler combined with a Korean assassin and a gun-slinging sharpshooter. I mean, these skill sets come together in an interesting way. However, with Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, I mean, these characters, again, they're all just so samey, it doesn't matter. In a D&D sense, it's what happens when players don't really communicate on who's playing what. It's a big reason why DMs don't like it when people stack up classes. Not saying you can't have 2 clerics in the party, but if you have all edgy rogues, it might get a little bit boring if you don't know how to play that. It's cool when you take different characters and put them together. Also, on top of all that, another mistake I noticed that's common in D&D/TTRPGs, that's in Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, these characters have very little reason to give a crap about the main plot. Again, we're ripping Seven Samurai. The whole point is defending this village, but like, why do any of these people care? In Rebel Moon Part 1, the whole movie is the characters going around to gather this team, and the reasons why the team actually joins together are just so flimsy. Again, in a tabletop role-playing game sense, this is what happens when characters are not communicating with the DM, when characters don't have a reason to actually join the party. When characters have no reason to be together, it's hard for me to give a crap about them, and that's the core of the issue. There's not a soul on this planet who I feel is a fan of these characters. Like, do people even remember the names of some of these characters? Like, does anyone remember General Titus? No, probably not. No one cares about these characters, and the big reason why is because they're boring. They don't talk to each other. They don't interact. They don't form a bond. That's why tabletop role-playing games are so fun, forming a bond between these characters. That care, that emotionality, that connection is what makes the characters feel more real, number one, but also number two, just more enjoyable. It's what makes this fun. Having everyone be this laconic, quiet assassin/legendary warrior who doesn't say much and who doesn't disclose much about their backstory, it's just not cool. And that connection, that lack of connection, is our next mistake. Seriously, team-up movies these days are a dime a dozen. We have so many of them, good ones, bad ones, but I mean, Zack Snyder made a good one. His Justice League is pretty alright. The characters have some connection. So imagine my shock when I watched Rebel Moon and saw that these characters, his own friggin' characters, don't have any connection at all. I already touched on this point a little bit, but there's a scene in part 2 that blew me away because it's the exact kind of thing I could see a bad DM doing. All the characters sit around a table and go on long monologues about each of their backstories. They literally know nothing about each other, so they're gonna sit around a table, popcorn style, and just tell their backstories. Boring. Terrible. Bad way to get characters to connect with each other. How anyone approved that is beyond me. But in a D&D game, I can kind of see how this could arise. It can be hard to get characters to talk about their backstories in a way that feels natural, especially if you're not sure how long your campaign is going to be. We can't all be Critical Role with 100+ 4-hour sessions. Most of us generously get to maybe 30, 50. My highest is 70, and even that was pretty hard. I mean, look, we don't know how these backstories are going to be conveyed, and some of our players are going to give us vastly different stuff for their backstories. That variance is what makes D&D fun to a degree. I already touched on that point as well, but again, it does give a little bit of hurt to you as the director of the story, as the dungeon master, figuring out how to actually convey these backstories. I think Caleb in Critical Role does a really good job at showing what it can look like at its best. In Critical Role, Caleb Widowgas has a very tragic backstory. He killed his parents. That's rough, buddy. Liam O'Brien, the person who plays Caleb, teases this backstory throughout the campaign. Caleb is uncomfortable whenever he kills someone with fire, and by uncomfortable, he has a straight-up panic attack. Why does that happen? It builds up a mystery, right? Eventually, when the penny drops and he tells 2 player characters about how he killed his own family, it's brutal. It's a sad scene, and it's a scene you can kind of see coming going back and watching the campaign. I mean, it's so obvious when you already know the backstory. It's a great way to convey it. Now, I don't think every DM is going to be able to do something like that, but God, Rebel Moon's version of that, where all the characters literally sit round table style and just tell their backstories, so much worse, so much less cool, such a missed opportunity. It's what happens when DMs don't work alongside their characters, who when DMs kind of don't give a crap about the characters' backstories. That's not what I'm saying about Zack Snyder. I'm sure he cares about these backstories, but it certainly doesn't look like it. It looks like a DM who's just like, okay, get your backstories out of the way now so we can move on to the plot. No, the backstory should be tied more with the plot. When the backstories of your characters in D&D or any tabletop game shouldn't be a footnote that's just talked about at round table style. It should be integrated in the campaign. If you're doing narrative heavy, I think that that's a good way to do it. Even in small ways, little Easter eggs that allude to their backstories are way better than this. When the DM can hardly care about the backstories of the characters, the other characters also don't care too. It's a big reason why that connection feels so absent in Rebel Moon, and a big reason why I think that connection can be absent in some tabletop games. Look, it starts with the story. It starts with the narrative of the individual characters. When you get the party to care about that, you can create some unshakable bonds between these characters. Alright, final big point, and this is huge. For filmmaking especially, but I think also for tabletop, putting the cart before the horse. Remember what I said earlier, teasing the big, major world-ending threat while your party are still fighting goblins at level 1? That's called putting the cart before the horse, and that's what Snyder did. Instead of focusing in on this small-scale story about defending farmers from the encroaching power, Snyder instead ties it into this huge narrative about a lost princess and rescuing her and saving the galaxy from the evil emperor and blah, 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 blah. Don't care. I love big threat campaigns. All of my campaigns have been big threat campaigns so far, and in a streamed game I'm going to be running soon, there are going to be allusions to bigger powers out there. But the focus should be on the story itself. You can't put the cart before the horse. So many DMs do this. They get hyped up for the world-ending threat their party are going to face at the end, and this sounds bad, okay? This is going to sound depressing. But the truth is, I got lucky. I'm lucky to be playing with some of my closest friends who I know we're going to be playing together for a long time. But a lot of people aren't that lucky. A lot of people don't make it to the end of their D&D campaign. That's just the truth. And besides my home game, I've had plenty of times where I think, wow, this could be like a years-long campaign, and it just turns out to not be. And when that happens, I pivot back to smaller scale stories, because there's nothing wrong with that. Matt Colville is a great game master, and he actually worked on the Dune RPG, a game and a universe that I think also directly inspired Rebel Moon and Zack Snyder. And Matt Colville made a video where he talked about how he thinks smaller scale adventures need to be more normalized. And as a lover of big long modules and big long adventures, I agree. I think smaller scale stories, smaller scale campaigns that last like 4 sessions, I think those are friggin' awesome, man. I mean, there's a big reason why I really wish people would buy Candlekeep Mysteries more from Wizards of the Coast. I mean, that is my favorite module that they have published in a long time, because it's a bunch of small, little adventures tied together that I think are just much more realistic for people to run. You don't always need to get to that big world-ending threat. Sometimes it's okay, just stay small scale. Rebel Moon would have been so much better if they actually paid attention to what made Kurosawa's film, Seven Samurai, what made Magnificent Seven, both of them, good. It's the characters, the people, the connections that they have. The action itself has meaning that doesn't just tie into this larger grand narrative that people don't care about yet. There's nothing wrong with that narrative, like I've said many times, but you gotta build up to it first. Don't put that cart before the horse. It's one of the major things that bothered me about this movie. I could not believe the audacity when part 2 of this 2-part saga ended and it only teased another saga. Not only teased, but basically directly begged for the rest of the saga. I mean, God, I've never felt a movie that's so purposefully unsatisfying. It's almost offensive to me. Dune earned this. Rebel Moon did not. Before you get overconfident about running your whole campaign, start with making a good opening, hook in your players, and then work from there. Alright, to wrap up this whole rant, I just want to say, I understand that Rebel Moon is a movie, not a Dungeons & Dragons game. Obviously. The plots you run in your D&D game are probably going to be, flawed, is the way I'm going to put it. Mine are flawed too. I mean, we're improvising a story. That's freaking hard no matter how good of a writer you are. But at the end of the day, your D&D game probably has something that Rebel Moon lacks. And it's something that I've alluded to and just directly said many times in this video. Do you and your party care about the characters? Do you like the world? Do you have a compelling story and narrative that you want to be a part of? If you've got those things, you're better than Rebel Moon. You're already there. If your audience, your players, like your story as a dungeon master, if you as the players like your characters and have a connection, you've beaten Rebel Moon already. These fundamental things are what Rebel Moon lacked. That's why it bothers me so much as a movie, just because at a baseline, I couldn't give less of a crap about anything happening. If you care about things happening at your game, whatever game you're playing, you've won. You're there. You've made it. You don't need a perfect narrative with no plot holes. You just need to give a crap. And once you give a crap, once you're emotionally invested in the story, that's when you have the best time playing these games. At least narrative-heavy games. I get that not every game's going to be like this, but if you want to tell a story, giving a crap is the first step. All right. That was a fun video. Wanted to do this one since I saw part 1, but since I found out part 2 was actually coming out, which I didn't think, I decided to wait until that came out, and my God, I was not disappointed. I mean, I was disappointed, but I knew I was going to be disappointed, so I guess I was not disappointed. We're going to end this video now. If you guys enjoyed them, please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Q and Play series, where we answer your questions in a rambling scripted format while playing some video games. It's linked in the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. No more rebels. To let me make to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell. Oh, through the mountains. Secret, 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 secret.